Okay, so I will introduce the four presenters for today who gratefully join us. First, I don't know who will go first, but Julia and Karma and Kaiya and Elias. Julia will present about her paper on creative appreciation, and she particularly focused on the meanings and significance and the symbolism of color in the movie, which I thought very insightful, very unique kind of topic. And the analysis and the prose writing were also very good. And next presenter will be Karma, who analyzed this Netflix TV drama about this Indian female protagonist in romantic relationship with other characters. And third, Kaiya will present about these diverse films and novels we read in the class, and she tied into different films and themes in a good coherent theme with these two concepts, which she termed hypervisibility and invisibility. And I think these two terms like really conceptualize and theorize really, really well about this broad range of different novels and films. And finally, Elias will present about this film Heretic Kid, was 1960? 1980, and he connected it to the current film and drama, Cobra Kai, and he kind of historicized and explained the political and cultural context of this kind of particular film of the 1980s, and also explained the background of this particular stereotype. So without further ado, we'll have. You want to go first, Karma? Am I?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Stand up.
It's up to you. You can sit there and let me, turn the pages of the slide, or you can come up here and you can turn yourself. It's up to you. Totally up to you. Sure.
So what else is around?
I'm trying to get. Okay, here we go.
All right, so I'm Karma, as introduced, and I did my paper on the show Never Have I Ever, which I really enjoyed watching, and so I figured it would be good trying to pick up something I already enjoyed watching, and I basically just kind of analyzed what it does good and like how it kind of falls flat in terms of Asian American representation. So I titled my paper Never Have I Ever Seen Accurate Asian American Representation, just to play off of the title. And with that, I sort of basically to start off my paper, I just identified stuff about the show. So it was created by Mindy Kaling, who's in the office and also created the Mindy Project, and also Lane Fisher. And it was released in April, like the first season was released in April 2020. And it's basically known for, it's also on Netflix, I'm watching for it. And it's known for its diversity and progress with Asian American representation and super diverse cast. And then it also was the #1 watched show on Netflix after the release of the third season, and had a 91% rating out of tomatoes. And it also won the People's Choice Award for Best Comedy Show in 2021, which basically through all this, you can see it's a very popular show. So I think having that accurate representation, and because it's in the limelight, like it needs to, like it has a lot of pressure to perform in that sense. And to summarize the show, if you haven't seen it, it's centered around an American Indian girl named Debbie Fishmore, and she's basically, it follows her like normal high school life, all this drama. She's coping with the death of her father, and she ended up like being like having paralysis from it, and then suddenly wasn't. It's very interesting. And she's working through maintaining her friendships and all these kind of like romantical interests, and she's like really trying to lose her virginity, like very big thing, and also dealing with her controlling parents. So it's like just a normal high school drama, I'd say. And then also as a first generation Indian American girl, the show focuses on what kind of means for her and like how her parents what her parents think, what other people think. So it's nice to have that kind of aspect in the show. And then so for my paper, I focused on sort of, as I said, the show's popularity is to a greater responsibility to properly represent race, religion, sexuality, and character in it. And especially because media is such a powerful tool and influencer, in that it can dictate the way that populations see certain groups and find other people, especially when media is the only source of information that people get about certain populations. And I also wanted to identify sort of where the show succeeds and where it falls flat. And so I started thinking about all the stereotypes we see in media. And so historically, when Asians and Asian Americans are featured in Hollywood media, they tend to follow a set of stereotypes that portray them in a negative light. And as we talked in class with Chinatown, interior Chinatown, we can see these kinds of stereotypes highlighted in that. So like the broken English for Asians who have been living in America for a long time, even though it would make sense that they would speak normal English fluently. There's also the nerd trope or the martial art expert, which is very interesting, and the hypersexualization of women and then the emasculation of men, which we also can see highlighted in Interior Chinatown as well. And then, and so within that, however, I took these stereotypes in mind, and I kind of figured out where the show kind of breaks out of these and also kind of falls into some stereotypes. So pretty much all the characters speak fluent English plus some of their native tongues. So if everyone's speaking English, you still have some of their like native history that they can incorporate in the show, which I think is also valuable. And typically historically in Hollywood media and even American media, you oftentimes have like the damsel in distress kind of trope, you know, women who are incapable of functioning by themselves. So this show does a really good job of having a lot of strong independent women. Debbie's mom is a dermatologist, very educated. Her cousin is getting her biology degree at Caltech. And also Debbie's mom's husband just died, so she's supporting Debbie on her own. And she's working through that. So I think that shows that women in general are capable of being smart, getting educated, supporting themselves, and don't necessarily need a man. The show also highlights the differences in values between generations and different cultures. So within the first episode, first couple of minutes even, we see that as Debbie's mom and her father they follow the more typical Indian Hindu traditions of like not eating beef. Because Debbie is American, she actually really likes eating beef and doesn't hold the same kind of traditional values that they do. And I think that shows that just because they're Indian doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to share the same values, which helps, you know, differentiate people in different groups. Additionally, with the bottom two, I'm focusing on a character called Paxton Yoshida, and he's Japanese American. And he's like the ideal man of the school. He's very popular, he's a player, very attractive, and this is not commonly seen in a lot of shows or media in general. And I think that's important to show attractive minority characters, especially there's some research done that shows that because of the historically unattractiveness of Asian men in media, about like 60% of young women say that they wouldn't date an Asian man. It's kind of a trend that we see. So having the representation of an attractive minority is important to kind of combat that. Additionally, he also challenges the model minority. He is very not smart, which I guess that's some ups and downs, but basically the model minority in this case would be like saying that all Asians are smart and no one would be raised except for good at math. Paxton is not that. He struggles academically, and also you might think that saying that a group of people is good at something, like they're all good at math, could be a good thing, but it's still stereotype and it's putting that pressure for them to perform a certain way. So having that Paxton not necessarily like super smart naturally, I think helps challenge that idea. And then focusing on some icky stuff, the within the first episode, there's I feel misrepresentation of the Hindu religion. Basically, it like the scene opens up and she's praying to there's like a little shrine in her house, and it's her praying, and she's asking to like go to a party with drugs and sex and all this drinking, which I think is not necessarily like what someone should be praying for in this case. And it kind of makes, if you don't know anything about Hinduism, it would assume like you would start to assume that that's what the religion is about, how you would treat the gods in the religion. So I think it would be important, especially because that's really the only time that is shown of her praying, so it's kind of the sole defining factor. So if the show were to include like another prayer situation that's maybe slightly different, it would be better as it would combat that idea. Additionally, Debbie's cousin Kamala is in an arranged marriage, which, you know, I think is still prevalent for many people in the world, but I also think that it is shown throughout like a lot of Middle Eastern characters and all this stuff, so it's not necessarily really adding anything to the show, and maybe come down without it. And then also there are some Orientalist ideas, and Orientalism is this theory from Edward Said about how Europe kind of has these colonialist ideas and like stereotypes about the Middle East and Middle Eastern women, which they also use to help justify their involvement with the Middle East. So some of these being like the Middle East is disordered and backwards and dirty, and like in this case, a lot of the women are very sexualized, and I think having Debbie's like very strong focus for like having sex and all this stuff kind of hints at that, but not. I think the creators did a good job of adding depth to her, so she's very academically focused, and you know, they've got her friends, so she's not just focused on sex. So I think having like depth to characters helps combat that negative potential. And then, so those are all of my topics that I addressed. And then basically to conclude, I felt like it should be considered that the show is catered to an American audience. So that means that it kind of fit to American tastes and understanding. And I thought that potentially they included these stereotypes to be funny or relatable, because we do see these stereotypes in real life. But I do think it's important to recognize that the show is making progress, breaking out of a lot of these harmful contexts, and it's sort of a stepping stone to have a better representation in the future for future shows. And that's kind of how I went through my paper, and that's my whole idea.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. By the way, I sent you the 4 papers files to your email. So if you want to read the papers, actually how worthy, like what kind of order, you know, you can follow right while reading. You know. All right. And also we'll have Q&A after all the 4 presentations. So if you come up with any questions or comments or recommendations, just write it down so you can bring it up later. Okay, now we'll have Kaiya. You wanna go? You wanna use your laptop?
No,
oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, we can use this.
All right. No, why does it look like that?
I'll find you and I'll let you know.
Okay. Oh wait, sorry. Looks funky. Okay. All right. Hi everyone. My name is Kaiya. I will be discussing my midterm paper today on the hypervisibility and invisibility analysis of stereotypes and racial discrimination to Asian Americans, specifically analyzing Interior Chinatown and Leaf Flower, the 2 novels that we read in class. Living in the United States, Asian culture is everywhere. You have your favorite Chinese restaurant down the street packaged in Oriental thank you boxes. Marvel recently released its hit blockbuster movie, Shang-Chi, and an uproot of Asian activism has been circulating the news. It seems like a plethora of Asians are finally getting their big break. Yet, is Chinatown, martial arts, and dumplings the only thing America knows about Asians? These stereotypes are what America has given spotlight to, specifically in the film and media industry, portraying only a slim truth about Asian Americans. And kept in the shadows is America's pattern of concealing the truth about its history of discrimination to Japanese Americans. In order to argue these two contradicting concepts of hypervisibility and invisibility, I will examine two novels that depict these stereotypes and racial discrimination against Asian Americans. Charles Yu uses satire in his fictional novel Interior Chinatown to expose the stereotypes among Asians within the film industry. On the other hand, Cynthia Kadohara, in her historical novel Wheatflower, narrates the mistreatment of Japanese Americans through the internment camps that U.S. government imposed during World War II. Both Yu and Kadohara communicate the effects of racial bias and discrimination against Asians by using strategic essentialism and the effects of historical negationism. Let it be known that the U.S. is capable of representing Asians through a hypervisible depiction of Asian culture and invisible representation of the history amongst Asians within the U.S. Representation within the media is vital because it is what society consumes and reproduces in the real world. The lack of representation among Asian roles within the film industry leads to a limited stereotypes of how society views Asians as a whole. In the novel, the main character, Willis Wu, attempts to fulfill his lifelong dream of playing the role of Kung Fu Guy, the highest and most dignified role of an Asian male. Yet the only jobs he can attain are generic Asian male, background Oriental male, dead Asian male, Oriental guy making a strange face, and delivery guy. This characterizes how Asian roles are not prioritized within the film industry, leading to limited exposure and prolonged stereotypes. Lack of representation of Asians playing diverse roles, apart from basic background characters, is evidence that racial bias is created. And the parts that are portrayed of Asians do not accurately represent Asian culture in its truest form. By Yu taking on a satirical tone throughout the novel, which can be seen by his description of characters, he is communicating the idea of strategic essentialism. And this is defined as the idea of an oppressed group intentionally taking on stereotypes about itself in order to disrupt or subvert the dominance that oppresses or marginalizes it. Being aware of the experiences and history of the past to fight for the present issues related to stereotypes is Yu's purpose in writing Interior Chinatown. Yu recognizes that there is truth in Asian stereotypes, but is not the full picture that America makes it out to be. Culture of Asians is then misrepresented by American films due to the lack of showcasing a diversity of Asians. Charles Yu purposefully includes stereotypes in Interior Chinatown to call out Hollywood for the racial motives of Asian culture. This can be demonstrated by the setting of Chinatown itself, which Wu states, Chinatown, and indeed being Chinese, is and always has been from the very beginning a construction, a performance of features, gestures, and culture and exoticism, invention, reinvention of stylization. This represents generic Asianness and how Chinese American culture is simplified to be more adaptable to mainstream Americans. Chinatown is not an accurate depiction of the realistic characteristics, yet it is a watered-down version of how China is realistically portrayed. This contributes to how stereotypes are reproduced within American culture through depictions of cultural settings. By conforming Asian culture to be more American, it leaves more room for mistruths and deception about Asians. The racial bias portrayed in Yu's novel applies to the real world, as the American Psychology Association conducted research on this effect of the racial bias of Asian Americans in their article, Countering Stereotypes About Asian Americans. Dr. Vivian Singh speaks out on the issue of discrimination when she states, "The nature of all stereotypes is that they dehumanize people and prevent us from seeing them in their whole humanity. This further proves how limited exposure of Asians in the film industry leads to a lack of representation of Asian culture as a whole. Society internalizes what they view in TV shows, movies, and films and apply those stereotypes to a large group of people." The article also argues that Asian Americans, who represent 6% of the US population, are frequently denied leadership opportunities. This is the idea of a bamboo ceiling, coined after the term glass ceiling, which can be applied to Asian actors and actresses in the film industry attempting to reach the spotlight, but are unable to do so simply because of their race. The result of this career limitation only leaves room for a small number of Asian American actors to succeed in their field, further creating a lack of diversity. Wu alludes to this idea when he states, "Unofficially, we understood. There was a ceiling, always had been, always would be. Even for him, even for our hero, there were limits to the dream of a simulation." The stereotypes described in Interior Chinatown are the firsthand experiences Asian Americans face. It is transformative that Yu is able to communicate these stereotypes, the satire of the film industry. yet at the same time exposing the pattern of racial stereotypes. While Charles Yu unmasked the hypervisible depictions of stereotypes among Asian Americans, similarly, Cynthia Kadohara portrays the undercover history of the mistreatment of Japanese Americans in 1942. Through Kadohara's historical novel, she's able to shed light on the hidden history of discrimination against Japanese Americans through the lens of Sumiko, a young Japanese American girl. Sumiko is the main character in the novel, whose family is relocated to one of the Japanese internment camps in the desert. Sumiko describes her feelings about herself or society, which is transformable in the way Japanese Americans were depicted. She states, "This is what it felt like to be lonely, like everyone was looking at you, like nobody was looking at you, like you didn't care about anything at all." This is vital because in 1942, Japanese citizens were viewed as an enemy and unloyal due to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which is described through Sumiko. This excerpt defines what it felt like to be Japanese American during these harsh times, and how the country she was born into betrayed her sense of self. The U.S. government immediately took on the narrative that all Japanese, whether American citizens or not, were posed as a threat to this country, even though no harm was done by the Japanese. In the internment camp, Sumiko overhears an American general state, "The very fact that no sabotage has taken place to date is a disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken." This notion that although the Japanese demonstrated zero bad intention to the US, it was still deemed as threatening. And vice versa. If any Japanese Americans took action, their bad behavior would be evidence of harmful intention. The Japanese Americans had no way to escape the racial bias the US had against them, and the only solution was to suffer through the harsh conditions that America imposed. Japanese immigrants came to America for freedom and equality, and in return, they were betrayed from the home of the free, land of the brave. What better bravery to turn against citizens and strip away rightful civil rights? In chapter 12, Sumiko recalls a conversation with her grandpa, Ji-chan, and his recollection of why he came to America. He states, "The thing that kept everybody going was a single word, America. That word was the most important thing his family owed, the only thing of value they possessed. The sacrifice Ji-chan made to come to this country that promises democracy and a meritocratic status were built on deception from the US government. America stripped away the rights of the so-called American dream by viewing their own citizens as enemies. The country that motivated Ji-chan to live a better life is the same country that enforced mass incarceration against its own citizens, a country that is not able to recognize its wrongdoings to a marginalized group." Historical negationism, denialism, is defined as the falsification or distortion of the historical record. It is the notion that historical events in the past are misconstrued and not recognized as the truth. The Japanese internment camps are a vital example of historical negationism, as the US government has done no part in acknowledging the betrayal done to thousands of Japanese Americans. The government and political leaders further historical negationism by not putting a spotlight on the times America had faulted in its actions. Instead, these institutions take pride in that they can pick and choose historical events that they deem significant to them. Novels such as Weedflower can educate society on the truth of Asian American history, bringing light to the concealed racial bias and discrimination done to Japanese Americans. Thus, overlooking and denying events in the past only induces harm to society, creating unawareness of the ugly truth of American history. America's misrepresentation of Asian culture is seen through its hypervisibility of stereotypes in the film industry and invisibility of the historical mistreatment of Japanese Americans through World War II. Charles Yu and Cynthia Kadohara exemplify this notion, as Yu communicates the idea of strategic essentialism and Kadohara portrays historical negationism. Both authors are transformative in their way of highlighting the injustices done to Asian Americans by the US, and they're able to offer a broader perspective on the issues undergoing racial bias and discrimination, and it is considerable to mention the different approach each author takes on. You provide satire, and Kadohara utilizes a historical narrative that showcases how impactful the use of storytelling is to educate a broader audience on the Asian American experience in the US. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you? Yeah. Yeah, even I assigned novels. I didn't know like there is this kind of way of connection, in the way to compare these two novels. That he did a good job. All right, so I'll third, Elias. Yeah.
Um, I didn't bring from PowerPoint, so I'm just gonna read it, but I'll give the context first. Just show of hands. How many of you have seen the Karate Kid? Okay, so most of you. So it's basically about this kid, Daniel, who moves to California from New Jersey. He's pretty poor and single mother. And he's bullied by the live there for Cobra Kai, and you see each other like all of them American, kind of Americanized version of karate that exists in California. And he meets Mr. Miyaki, who's a sensei from Japan, here. He fought in World War II. He takes him on as a student, teaches him, and he kind of fights his bully and beats him. So I can't say that right now, but in the summer of 1984, a movie was released that would become a blockbuster hit, and at the same time, make history for Asian Americans across the country in both positive and negative ways. The film is John G. Avildsen's The Karate Kid, and it stars Pat Morita as Mr. Miyagi, an old department superintendent that knows karate master who helps the main protagonist, Daniel Russo, played by Ron Franchio, defeat his bully and Johnny Barnes, played by William Chapman, by becoming a sensei and training. Most would agree that the film is a landmark in the history of cinema. Lines like wax on, wax off, and super leg are commonplace among pop culture fanatics. While the film is both one of the first and a few Hollywood blockbusters that awards an Asian actor a large protagonist role, many argue that it still suffers from the same problems films with actors from Asian backgrounds tend to fall to in America, perpetuating stereotypes and racism. The Karate Kid was released at a time when Asian representation in Hollywood was scarce and frankly racist. Two other films were released earlier that year, 16 Candles and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, that both featured racist and stereotypical depictions of Asian people. However, neither of these roles are particularly significant, which is where the Karate Kid decides to flip the script by casting an Asian American for an important role in the Hollywood movie. Ali Morita, Pat Morita's daughter, spoke regarding the film's release. Quote, for anyone that grew up during that time period, finally there was a movie starring an Asian American actor, she said. It had a good 10-year lifespan. I think for a lot of Asian Americans, even those who had problems with the character of it was like, wow, I can star in a film if I was Asian American. I think it was an experience for a lot of people. We hadn't had that in some time. Mr. Miyagi is depicted as a wise, spiritual, and skillful war veteran, an overall hero to the audience. A far cry from the two films mentioned earlier. The film provided a role model for Asian Americans across the country to live up to and define inspiration for life. Something sorely lacking in the landscape of cinema in America at that point. The film also put traditional cinematic narratives perpetuated throughout American films. The biggest example of this is that the protagonists, Daniel and Mr. Miyagi, are two very different characters that come together to form a timeless friendship. Daniel is an underprivileged Italian American kid who is a single mother, and Miyagi is a Japanese immigrant who has limited English and the superintendent, janitor of the apartment complex. Two main antagonists in the film are white, privileged all-Americans. Their karate dojo and teachings called Cobra Kai represent the colonized and Americanized version of traditional Japanese karate, emphasizing aggression and violence. Miyagi's style serves as a foil to Cobra Kai, as it comes directly from Okinawa, and teaches karate as the art of self-defense, while focusing on more spiritual aspects of our culture. In the end, Japanese tradition conquers all Americans. I love the instrument in which this is presented is through of the white American, at least it's underprivileged, uses Japanese karate and has Japanese family. One of the most emotional and raw aspects of the film is how it points out and represents the past and continued racism against Asian Americans, specifically Japanese Americans. In a few scenes, we see people hurl racial slurs at Miyagi, and of course, he retaliates in a way that illustrates his tranquil and zen nature, while still instilling fear in those taunted, like slicing the top off of men's ears. Arguably one of the most saddening and deeply emotional scenes of the entire film sees Daniel walk in on a drunk Miyagi with his old military uniform. The audience learns that Miyagi loves his wife and son in a Japanese internment camp during World War II. A large Hollywood production spending time in the film to attempt to illustrate the pain, suffering, and loss that many Asian Americans face is a rarity. However, Karate Kid accomplished this through a moving and authentic performance by Pat Morita, one that likely offers many Japanese Americans who lived through World War II something to relate to and empathize. In fact, he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his performance, though only 4 other Asian Americans have been nominated for up to that point. Although the film made strides for Asian Americans' representation and narrative focus, many would argue that it also made strides backwards by perpetuating Asian stereotypes and commercialized Asian culture. Objectively, Miyagi is presented in a positive manner, as discussed before, but this depiction of an old, mysterious Asian man with deep spiritual and traditional ideologies that also happens to be a karate master is one that has been created through stereotypes that align as assigned Asian actors. At various points in Miyagi's on screen, the score transitions to a pan flute tune intended to be cultural incorporated to the character, but instead comes off as stereotypical Hollywood version of Asian music. So today, it's one example of many that is cultural appropriation. Miyagi himself speaks in a heavy accent and broken English, despite having lived in America for the majority of his life. Cameron was born and raised in America, and he speaks perfect English, which emphasizes the idea that the film wanted to perpetuate the need for an Asian actor with a heavy accent to represent all Asian Americans. When Miyagi does speak, he tends to use short aphorisms. These phrases resemble those written inside fortune cookies, an Americanized version of Asian culture. He can be seen trying to catch flies with chopsticks, tending to bonsai trees, and his home is covered with Asian imagery and symbols. To many, Miyagi is a walking stereotype. Beth Union, a renowned Asian American author and journalist who saw the film when he was raised as a child, remarks, Mr. Miyagi is a perpetual force that exists to serve the whiteness that surrounds him. This is still his role, even in death, because Mr. Miyagi's real self doesn't matter. Asian identity doesn't either. It's karate moves and dance music and chase austere ideas about inner peace. And sushi and buns. And it's all for the consumption, profit, drive, and gain by people. The film uses Marita's style performance to commercialize these stereotypes to the public, therefore contributing to the existing conditioning of racist fame in Hollywood. This stereotypical depiction of Asian Americans culminates at the climax of the film after Daniel suffers a leg injury due to a continual strike from John. Miyagi goes to the back, the Daniel's writhing in pain, and performs up Hollywood's racist depiction of some kind of Easternness. Miyagi claps his hands together, rubs them, and just like that, Daniel comes out ready to fight. The film alludes to some secret medicine that Miyagi is capable of performing. This also comes off as a stereotypical talent. The old Mr. Karate sensei can also magically feel objects. These kinds of stereotypical characterizations and scenes lead to people mocking Asian Americans by impersonating Miyagi and the things that he did in the film. All in all, The Karate Kid stands as a watershed moment in cinema, one of the first examples of an Asian American achieving a significant role in the blockbuster film. However, the role came with a lot of the same stereotypes and racism that roles for Asian actors often depicted. Many would argue the film stands as one of the biggest proponents of racism of Asian Americans. It's hard to deny the efforts of English creators to illustrate the hardship and suffering Asian people in America have and continue to face. It's difficult to decipher whether the film had more of a negative or positive effect on the image and treatment of Asian Americans, but it's clear that some progress was made and some progress was lost. Who knows where Asian Americans would be or which American cinema if the project was never made, but it will stand in history as an important film in America, and as a building block for Asian actors' progress for fair treatment and representation in Hollywood.
Thank you. Gonna go? Do you use PowerPoint or you wanna? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I don't read your is about the color symbolism. So the 2018 Hollywood blockbuster Crazy Rich, directed by John M. Chu, shocked the world with its majority Asian cast and progressive symbolism. Along with having a successful storyline, representation of Chinese culture made the Asian and Asian American population feel embraced by America's film industry. Throughout the film, there are many symbolic features woven into the storyline. From metaphors to aesthetic design choices, the producers of Crazy Rich Asians made deliberate choices to incorporate long-standing Chinese practices and cultural traditions. This paper will go into great depth about the significance of the use of color in the film. Colors are very meaningful in Chinese culture because each color holds great significance. From start to finish, the film uses color to signify meaning and draw emotion from the audience. To be more specific, the colors red and white have a large presence on screen during the movie. The calculated use of color throughout Crusader's Asians is a symbol of Chinese culture and brings deeper meaning to the film. To begin, color has a long historical background in Asian culture. The traditional uses and colors have been around for centuries, but over time have evolved and grown. More specifically, these simply argues that China, Korea, and Japan's conventional ideologies are based on Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. Their color cultures are based on yin yang, meaning metal, wood, water, fire, and wind. It is known that colors became symbolic in Asian culture as they were associated with one of these 5 properties listed above. Lee goes on to say that the color red was understood to represent the yang segment of the theory of yin yang, a positive force signifying strength, passion, absolute power, and life. Each color had unique meaning and power in Asian culture. In deciding what to write this essay on, I was immediately drawn to focus on color because growing up, I had always associated China with Chinese New Year, dragons, festivals, and lanterns that were all conveniently red. I had always known red as the color of luck in China, or as Miracle on Four says, red signifies success, prosperity, and popularity. But I was curious if the color was ever used in areas other than traditional practices. Currently, I'm taking a film class called Hollywood, where we analyze movies, and I realized I can combine the 2 fields and analyze the color symbolism and presentations. The film did not lack symbolism, and I found numerous connections between the color and significant events in the movie. Most of the color I found throughout the movie was the color of clothing the actors and actresses were wearing. We also found that costume colors are also cultural codes exhibiting clear visibility and strong symbolism in the elements of costumes. This knowledge perfectly supports the ideas I was pondering while watching the movie. All in all, the long-standing color symbolism and traditions in China are also evident in the costumes and screenplay of Crazy Rich Asians. To continue, there are several dominant colors in the movie, but the most prominent and significant is the color red. There are numerous scenes where red is on screen, whether it be clothing, props, or background features. However, I'll be focusing on the large moments where red is symbolic and present. One of the first most noticeable red appearances is when Rachel's shopping for a dress to feed Nick's family, and her mother insists she wears a red dress because it symbolizes good fortune and fertility. Rachel's mother wants her daughter to make the best first impression possible, and as she does, wearing a lucky color will make a good first impression. This scene explicitly says that red is a lucky color and implies that it holds great significance historically. Digging deeper into the connotation of red, Oxford states that forever Chinese people have worshipped red because red can be associated with the sun and fire. The sun and fire bring light, warmth, and hope to people. In the Chinese people's minds, red is a symbol of auspiciousness and prosperity. I do not know the color is associated with sun and fire, and that is why so many people are drawn to it and find comfort in it. This example of Rachel's mother encouraging her to wear red is very clearly symbolic but is not to be overlooked. Moreover, the first scene of the entire movie, when Eleanor is trying to check into the hotel, and the concierge rapidly throws out with them until he finds out she is the new owner of the hotel. She is wearing a red scarf and red accessories. These subtle details may seem irrelevant to the plot, but I believe they're purposely choices made by the directors to signify Eleanor's power. As mentioned previously, red is the symbol of power and strength, 2 characteristics that Eleanor emphasized with points. Her scarf worn around her neck is striking in itself. The elegant red color makes her presence come off that much more dominant and fiery. Similarly, when we are first introduced to Rachel, she was wearing a red shirt while playing poker in her lecture. As we know, she outsmarted the student with her high level of knowledge and strength in education. This is another example of a minor detail of color that corresponds with Rachel in this scene because she holds power and strength. While watching the movie and taking note of every red object shown, I began to wonder if color symbolism was even something brought up during the production of the film. Even if it was not John M. Chu's intent to use red accessories to highlight Elmore Rachel's charisma, there are many parallels between the color's meaning and significant events they're committing. Furthermore, I do believe that there were deliberate choices to use the color red to highlight Chinese culture. Illustrating the wedding scene, there are red lanterns and cloth art of flowers and flowers throughout the entire image. The groomsmen and Colin were also all wearing red flowers on their tuxedos at the ceremony. Even before the wedding, at the bachelor and bachelorette parties, the decor of golf carts and mixed wedding green box for Rachel were all red. These instances of red are calculated choices made to honor traditional Chinese wedding traditions. Zhang, in his academic journal titled Red or White, Coloring Chinese Folk Songs, declares that red is the classic color used in weddings because it is associated with sexual ripeness and is used to be the most suitable color to convey love. Alcor adds on to say that red wedding decor does not only bring a happy atmosphere to the wedding, but it is also seen as a beautiful vision and blessing of marriage. For these cultural reasons, I can confidently say that the red details are meant to illuminate traditional Chinese weddings. On the whole, I found that there was a lot of purposeful usage of red throughout the film, although I missed upon instances where I discovered connections between red and symbolism that were not meant to hold any greater significance than just a color choice. On the contrary, the second most spiritually and culturally significant color in Chinese culture could not differ more from red. This color is white. Similarly to how the meaning of red was brought up explicitly by Rachel's mom, she also mentioned that the blue and white is for Chinese funerals, when Rachel suggests wearing a white dress to meet Nick's family. While I recognized the lucky value of red, I had no idea that white had a negative connotation in Chinese culture. When first hearing the statement, I was unsure how true it was, but as Author says, in ancient China, white is opposed to red. This makes perfect sense because red is so worshipped, whereas white is looked down upon. Going back to how Rachel's mother said white is for funerals, Okafor claims that white is a taboo color and means disaster, an expression of exhaustion, bloodless, and lifelessness, which symbolizes death and ominous omen and the dead man. I find this very interesting because in American culture we use the color black to symbolize death and ominous, and white, black, the opposites of each other. Personally, it makes more sense that black is associated with these dark emotions because it is darker in shade, and people are often afraid of the dark. White to me though means plain purity and safety, so I find it fascinating that in Chinese culture they use white, how we use black. Another pivotal moment in the movie is when Rachel and Astrid are sitting on the beach having a deep conversation. Rachel opens up about how she feels alienated in Nick's family and mistreated by his friends, and Astrid reveals that her husband, Michael, is having an affair. The important thing to note about this scene is that Rachel and Astrid are both wearing white. This is noteworthy because in most other scenes they are both dressed in color. Whether it was just a mere coincidence or John and Chu intended the symbolism, the white costume color holds significance in this rather depressing scene. As Author says, the original symbolism of white is bad, so perhaps Chu intentionally dressed the girls white to convey their melancholic feelings. While there are numerous instances where white shows up in some bad occurs, I feel as if this is the most symbolic moment because they are discussing such heavy topics. All in all, the use of color throughout crucial occasions holds deep symbolism and longs different historical meanings to Chinese culture. Both red and white appear quite frequently throughout the film, and as they discussed, allow for a deeper understanding of the characters' feelings and emotions. I believe this movie did an excellent job using color as a tribute to traditional Chinese culture. The Hollywood industry should take note of how well John and Chu represented Asian culture throughout the film while delivering a good storyline.